Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Beyond Access series. Tonight, we're talking about academic screeners. I'm joined with some folks from our instructional team in the special education office, and of course, our Senior Executive Director of Instruction and Compliance, Kimberly Ramones. But before I turn it over to them, I have to do some housekeeping items. As you all know, my name is Jose Rios Lua. I'm the Director of Family Empowerment and Communications for Special Education at the DOE. And it is my pleasure to serve as your host tonight and every night that we have Beyond Access. Tonight, as we do in every night with Beyond Access, you will have the ability to ask your questions using the Q&A function. So please type them in throughout the session. We will be answering them throughout the session and also answering them in a specific time of Q&A that we've set aside towards the end. Tonight, we will only be answering questions specific to the topic of academic screeners. If you have any other questions, please feel free to type them into the Q&A and we will download them and reach out after this presentation to answer those questions. Tonight, we're in a webinar format. So that means that as participants, you don't have the ability to unmute yourself or use the chat, but that is why we have the Q&A available to all of you. At the end of this presentation, we'll talk a little bit more, but you'll get the link. We are recording tonight, and you'll get a link to the recording, which will be hosted on our YouTube channel. And if you want to find the YouTube channel, all you have to do is go to youtube.com and search Beyond Access, and we're the first thing that pops up. So if you want to find out any of the previous sessions that we've had, that is where you'll find them. So I think I've said a lot. So without any further ado, I would love to bring on board Kimberly Ramones, our Senior Executive Director of Instruction and Compliance. Good evening, Kimberly.
Good evening, Jose, and thank you to our audience members who are joining us tonight, spending your 7:30 to 8:30 hour with us to learn about academic screeners. I am so thrilled to be joined tonight by Winta and Megan from our Special Education Office instructional team, who will spend really the next 45-50 minutes going through details on academic screeners, what they are, why schools are doing them, and what is the next step then for your child. Jose, can you display our presentation?
I'm going to pass it over to Megan, who's going to control the screen share.
Thank you so much. So to kick us off tonight, thank you, Jose. Thank you always for your guidance here. So just to recap, for those of you who may have joined us last week, our office did a Beyond Access series where we outlined around special education recovery services. And during last week's session, we talked very much about how special education recovery services are a part of academic recovery services. So just to recap what academic recovery means, as you may know, the DOE has made very significant investments in academic recovery. And academic recovery, the tenets of academic recovery for the Department of Education, first of all, it's for every student. Secondly, academic recovery focuses on improving and strengthening the day-to-day instruction that your child receives in his or her classroom. It's the daily experiences that your child engages and interacts with every second that they walk through the school door. So the academic recovery plan is available for all students. And again, it focuses very much on a couple of key areas. The DOE academic recovery plan focuses on strengthening literacy instruction, strengthening daily instructional practices, ensuring that our students are college and career ready, integrating social-emotional and academic learning under one umbrella. It also focuses on strengthening the digital citizenship of our students as we are coming out of this pandemic and know that we've learned so much around instructional technology. making sure that there's an emphasis that we continue to capitalize on the strengths that technology can bring us and bring them into the day-to-day classroom to leverage instruction. Again, academic recovery is for all students. And as we talked a little bit about last week, additional services for special education recovery are there for students with IEPs, but academic recovery is for all. That includes students with IEPs, our multilingual learners, our students in temporary housing, our students in foster care, and with the focus on equitable access to resources. Next slide. So again, the focus is really on strengthening that daily instruction for your child. So that day-to-day experience from your child to teacher, teacher to child, the day-to-day experiences that your child interacts with as he or she walks through the school door. And one thing new this year is around what's called academic intervention services. AIS services are additional instructional supports provided to students with greater academic needs as identified by multiple sources of information. One of those sources of information are academic screeners, which we will go into great detail after this slide. Currently, every DOE school is going through the screening process in which these classroom assessments are used to identify students who are not meeting benchmark or standards. This again applies to all students, including our students with IEPs and multilingual learners. And these assessments help teachers to make shifts in their daily practice and strengthen core instruction. Again, that day-to-day instruction, that day-to-day experience that your child receives every day that they are at school. I'm going to turn it over now to Megan and Winta, who will go into great detail about the academic screeners, some of the academic screeners that are commonly being used in our DOE schools. Thank you, Jose.
Thank you, Jose. Good evening. So we're going to start with knowing students well. Educators must know each student well in order to provide instruction that best meets the student's needs. Assessments are a valuable tool and they provide additional information about students, including everything else that we learn about students just from being around them, learning about their histories and things of that nature. They also allow teachers to understand what students bring with them in the classroom through background knowledge, how to best anchor new learning to existing knowledge for students, which is very important. So the data from assessments allows schools and educators to determine places where core instruction, the instruction that students receive each and every day in the classroom, is working, and the areas that may need to be strengthened so all students can reach their full potential. Additionally, assessments identify those students that may need additional support through more targeted instruction or potentially intervention in addition to receiving core instruction. Megan. So what is academic screening is a research-proven method to examine a student's progress towards grade level goals. These screening measures are not high-stakes testing. The results are not used to screening indicators, a quick overview or pulse of how an individual student or groups of students perform. Skills-based screening measures are brief assessments that measure important literacy and mathematics outcomes for students. Assessments are administered to all students, including English language learners and students with disabilities in a given grade 3 times per year, in the fall, winter, and spring. When all students complete the same assessment, the results can be evaluated for both individual and group outcomes. Depending on the screener used, certain accommodations may be available for students, while other accommodations may not. For example, some screeners may allow for the use of larger print for students with visual impairments, while other screeners may allow for the use of text-to-speech. Again, these are solely dependent on the screener used and the individual measures done with students. To ensure that all test results are grouped together, testing accommodations may not be provided during a screening assessment for certain measures. So during tonight's session, Megan and I will discuss Acadience reading, Acadience math, and map growth academic screeners. Why do we use academic screening? What's the purpose? Well, academic screening tells us what a student knows at a specific point in the year. So at a specific time, we are able to use a screener to assess what a student knows and what a student is able to do. So again, we use these screeners 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. The academic screening data can show the impact of instruction, as well as those students who may require additional support to meet learning goals or close gaps. These screeners are a helpful tool for schools to ensure students are receiving the instructional support needed to meet those goals. The data helps educators and school-based teams measure a student's acquisition of critical reading and math skills, identify students who may need additional support. The purpose of these assessments is not to identify disability. Additional testing may be needed in order to determine that if whether or not special education services are necessary for a student. Additionally, a student's overall progress on IEP goals can be identified through the use of screening data. Information around academic screening shared with families allows for increased communication with you and your child's school community, as well as increased comfort and engagement around academic screeners in general and how they work. So the image you see in front of you now is a snapshot of how teachers interact with assessments for your child. An assessment is just one part of a child's school-wide instructional system, and screening is just one piece of that one part. Students are assessed in many ways in order to gain different information. For example, assessments take place every day in your child's classroom as they engage in asking questions and answering questions in content area discussions. Additionally, the curriculum and instruction that students are engaged in each and every day is an extremely important piece, as we've previously discussed. The screening data can allow schools to adjust instruction accordingly to meet the needs of all learners. Lastly, schools set up an environment and the accompanying resources around literacy and numeracy through professional development and collaboration amongst educators, staff, and families. Here we have that lists reading and math that may be in your child's school. So within the DOE, here are some of the commonly used academic screeners. Again, we will discuss Acadians for reading, Acadians for mathematics, and map growth. You may hear about some of these other screeners from your child's school. Your child's school may use different screeners. Within the areas of reading and math, we commonly see Acadians as an academic screener, as well as increasingly map growth. So speak to your child's school directly about which schools they may or may not be using this school year.
Okay, so let's start by looking at Acadians as an academic screener within the area of reading. So Acadians reading is currently used for kindergarten through 2nd grade. However, your child's school may be using this assessment through 5th grade. These assessments are individually administered, skill-based screeners, and students are assessed in a one-to-one setting, meaning teacher and student. The assessment times can range from 3 to 8 minutes per student per time of the school year, meaning beginning, middle, and end, or fall, winter, spring. Students are assessed in early literacy and reading skills, and the measures or assessments that will be used will vary by the individual grade level. We will take a look at those essential literacy and reading skills more in just a few minutes. So let's start with first, what is Acadians reading? So as mentioned earlier, Acadians reading is a set of measures used to assess essential early literacy and reading skills for our students. And these assessments can be used to identify those students who may be at risk for reading difficulties. It also helps teachers identify areas to target instructional supports. It will also monitor the progress of students over the course of the year. And it will examine the effectiveness of instructional supports that have been put into place for our students, which in some cases may be intervention. So now let's take a look at what an essential early literacy and reading skill is. So an essential early literacy and reading skill are skills that are predictive of how students acquire reading, and it also gives us a look into students' later reading achievement as well. So it allows us to look at where students are now, and based on their data, where they will go from there. So these essential early literacy and reading skills are something that our educators can teach. And when they are taught, they improve outcomes and later reading outcomes for our students and our children. So these essential literacy and reading skills are directly tied to what students must be taught in order to become successful readers. And all 5 of these essential literacy and reading skills, which we'll look at in just a minute, will meet this criteria. They are predictive of later reading outcomes for our students. They can be taught, and when they are, children are more likely to become successful readers. So here I'm going to take you through how a student moves from the learning to read phase into the reading to learn phase. And this rope here is adapted from something called Scarborough's rope. And the graphic allows us to see the interrelated nature of those essential literacy and reading skills. So the longest strand that you see here, this purple one, is the first one to develop in our children. And this is listening comprehension. And this basically begins at birth, when caregivers begin to speak and talk to their infants. Then, somewhere around 1 year of age, children will then begin to say their first words. And that's when you'll start to see vocabulary and oral language, which is our green strand, start to develop. And at the same time, listening comprehension will not stop developing. It's going to continue to develop for children, and it's intertwined with that vocabulary and oral language development. Then, as we move down the line, we move into students and children into their preschool years. Children will then start to develop something called phonemic awareness, and that is our orange strand that you see right here. So phonemic awareness is related to vocabulary and oral language at this age, because the more words that children know, the easier it is for them to start thinking about and categorizing them by something called phonemic features. So that would be words that sound the same at the end. So for example, students can identify cat, bat, mat, hat, right? They all sound the same at the end. Or let's say words that start with the same sound. So boy, box, ball, bat. I know they all start with b, right? So again, phonemic awareness is the ability to identify and manipulate those sounds that they hear in spoken words. So when students are engaged in phonemic awareness, they're not seeing any print, they're simply hearing it. They're hearing the words, they're hearing the sounds. So once children have that solid foundation in phonemic awareness, they are ready to then learn that basic phonics, right? So this is when we get into letter sound correspondences. So if I see the letter M, I know that letter M says and they're also ready to develop an understanding of alphabetic principle. So that's the understanding that letters are going to represent sounds in spoken words, okay? So as we continue on from there, children can then start to read simple texts, right, that have basic phonics skills, and they have an understanding of that principle. So then we're looking at something called accurate and fluent reading of a text, followed by then being able to learn more advanced phonics, so larger words, right? Words with multiple parts to them. All of these skills here are going to be interwoven, and they're going to continue to develop, and they're going to continue to become more complex over time. And when children can read those simple texts accurately, right? So reading all the words correctly on the page, then we're also looking at the ability to read fluently, right? So accuracy, reading the words correctly, using expression when our children read, and then reading at the appropriate rate or the appropriate speed. And then at the end, we can see up here, we've gone through our light strand of accurate and fluent reading. Here's our strand around alpha-beta principle, basic phonics, and advanced phonics. Then we have our dark blue strand of reading comprehension. And you can see how that starts to come into play. It's also woven into our rope. All of these skills are going to continue to develop over time. And children will then start to move from that learning to read, now being able to take all these skills and put them together, moving into the reading to learn. So being able to read and pull information from that text. So we have another take on that here, on those essential early literacy and reading skills through something called the simple view of reading. So this breaks down those skills into the ability to read words and sentences, which you can see up here in our top box. And there we're looking at phonemic awareness, which we just looked at, right? Identifying the sounds in spoken words, the individual phonemes in spoken words without any print. Then we're moving into phonics, looking at more basic phonics, and moving into more complex, we're looking at larger words, and then reading fluency. So being able to read with that accuracy, the appropriate speed when I'm reading, and bring expression into my reading. Then we have the two pieces that go into understanding what is read. So that is our children's overall understanding of vocabulary knowledge, as well as comprehension. And that vocabulary will be inextricably linked to comprehension as well. And all of those pieces, again, come together to our students becoming successful readers. And at the end of our session today, we're going to provide you with some sessions that were done as part of the series last year to support your students with literacy at home. And those are some recorded sessions that we'll provide you with at the end today. So each Acadian's assessment is aligned with an essential early literacy and reading skill. So now you'll start to see some of those pieces from the rope and our simple view are aligned with specific assessments. So our first assessment here is something called first sound fluency, which is directly tied to phonemic awareness. In this type of assessment, first sound fluency, a student is given a word such as the word fan. And in that word, the student must identify as the first sound in the word fan. So we're looking at the student's ability to isolate, to identify that first sound that they hear in a spoken word. Okay? This aligns directly to phonemic awareness and is done without print. Then we have something called letter naming fluency. So letter naming fluency is the ability to be able to see a letter on a page and be able to identify that is, I see the letter B and I can name it, that's the letter B, okay? So this is actually not tied to any of those early literacy and reading skills that I just went over. However, it is a very good indicator of risk, and that's why it's used in these assessments, because if a student is unable to identify letter names, it can be a indicator of later reading outcomes for our students. It can present a red flag. So we do it early on in the Acadian's assessments around the kindergarten age. Then we have something called phoneme segmentation fluency. Phoneme segmentation fluency is again allied to phonemic awareness. So we're not looking at any print, but I'm giving the student a word. So I say the word pen, and the student has to segment it, meaning break it down into the individual sounds that they hear. So a student would have to say p, without seeing the word in print. We automatically see it because we know the spelling of that word. So then we have something called nonsense word fluency. Nonsense word fluency is actually one of the better assessments when we're looking at assessing students' overall decoding abilities in phonics. So how well they're able to read words. It's directly tied to alphabetic principle and basic phonics. And the reason it's such a great assessment is because students can't memorize the words on the page. They actually have to use that knowledge they have of letter sounds and apply it to words that are nonsense, right? They're make-believe words. And our last assessment is something called oral reading fluency. Now, this is aligned to many of those early literacy and reading skills that you saw. It's aligned to phonics, fluent reading of text, and reading comprehension. So within this section, students are asked to read a passage, and then after reading are able to give a retell of how much they remember, how much they can remember based on the story that they read. So kind of a high-level overview of some of the assessments that are part of Acadian's screening assessments through the reading component.
So let's take a look at Acadian's math. Acadian's math is currently used for kindergarten through second grade as an academic screener. However, your child's school may be using this assessment through sixth grade. Students are assessed in essential math skills, and the assessments used will vary by grade level. They will also vary by time of year. So if you take first grade, at the beginning of first grade, the assessments may differ than at the end of first grade. The same for second grade. While the assessments themselves don't differ, the expectations that students are expected to meet will differ. In kindergarten and most of first grade, these are visually administered skill-based screeners, meaning students are assessed in a one-to-one setting. So it's the educator and the student. There is one assessment in the first grade that is group administered, and that's the computation assessment. And that doesn't happen until the end of first grade. In second grade, there are two group administered assessments, computation and concepts and applications. So we'll take a look at the foundational math skills for these assessments in just a moment, but I want to go back to a point made earlier that all of these screeners are brief. The early numeracy assessments are 60 seconds in length. The group administered computation assessments at first grade and second grade are 2 minutes for each worksheet, and students will complete 2 worksheets. So that's a total of 4 minutes for the entire computation assessment. The concepts and computations assessment administered at the second grade is a total of 5 minutes. So as you can see, these are all brief assessments. What is Acadian's math? Similarly to Acadian's reading, Acadian's math is a universal screening and assessment tool that measures the acquisition of math skills from kindergarten through sixth grade. Acadian's math includes measures for early numeracy, computation, and problem solving. The measures are indicators of essential skills that every child must master in order to become proficient in mathematics. These measures are used to regularly monitor the development of math skills over time in order to provide timely instructional support and prevent the occurrence of later math difficulties. By design, the Acadian's math measures are brief, powerful indicators of mathematical skills that are quick and efficient to administer and score, serve as academic screening, and help us identify students who are in need of intervention support, as well as evaluate the effectiveness of instruction and intervention. So what math skills are we assessing when we are using the Acadian's math screener? We're looking at 3 buckets: number sense, computation, and concepts and applications. So the measures were developed using recent research to determine foundational skills or areas in which students would need in order to become good mathematicians. Assessing student performance on critical math skills can help us identify which children are on track to become successful at math and which children are likely to struggle. The early numeracy measures focus on some of the foundational skills required to develop number sense. Number sense includes, but is not limited to, the ability to compare, the magnitude of numbers, deciding which number is larger or greater when given a set of numbers. Number sense also refers to a child's fluidity and flexibility with numbers, determining what numbers mean in isolation and in relation to other numbers and in relation to other contexts. It also means an ability to perform mental mathematics and to look at the world and make comparisons using numbers. Number sense is an important and primary predictor of future academic achievement. The computation measure is exactly what it sounds like. Students are given 2 minutes per worksheet and asked to add or subtract numbers up to grade level expectations per state standards. The Common Core state standards are the standards that were used to design this assessment. When students complete the first worksheet, they are given a second worksheet to complete, also within 2 minutes. So again, that's a total of 4 minutes for the computation measure. And computation, though it's a 4-minute assessment, plays a major role in overall math achievement. Finally, we have concepts and applications. Concepts and applications ask students to show their understanding of math concepts, vocabulary, and their ability to apply that understanding to solving problems. Again, second grade students are given 5 minutes to complete this assessment. So let's look at the Acadience measures or Acadience assessments that students will encounter. So let's start with number identification. Remember, Megan said that the letter naming measure doesn't really have a benchmark, but it is an indicator of future risk. And that's the same with number identification. Number identification, Megan, if you can just go to the next slide, asks students to name numbers. So what you see before you is 5, 3, 2. Students would be expected to identify those numbers as 5, 3, 2. Again, 60 seconds is the time allotted. The second measures we have are our beginning quantity discrimination and advanced quantity discrimination. So these happen at 2 different times. Beginning quantity discrimination will happen in the kindergarten, and advanced quantity discrimination will happen in 1st grade. So what we want to look at here are students' ability to determine which quantity is greater. Megan, can you advance the slide? So here you see the dominoes. That's what a student sees the first time they encounter this measure of quantity discrimination. The second time they encounter this measure, they see numbers. The first time they see the numbers, you see the dots, and you see 5 in one box and you see 1 in another box, and the student has to say that the box of 5 is greater than the box of 1. There's another skill being measured. It's indirectly measured, meaning we can't really tell, but we look at things like how much time does it take a student to respond to the prompts to make this determination, and that's subitization. Subitization is the ability to instantly judge the number associated with a group of items. So what that means is you see the 5 dots and you know that's 5 without having to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, it's an indirect measure. If students do count, they're not penalized in any way, but obviously it would slow their pace down and they wouldn't be able to respond to as many sets in the 60 seconds as if they did not have to count the dots. The second time students will see advanced quantity discrimination is in the 1st grade. At this time, students are presented with 2 numbers and they have to identify the greater number. Now, students cannot point to the greater number. They have to say, when given 14 and 22, that 22 is the greater number. Magnitude comparison requires an understanding of place value and the ability to perform mental calculations. Then we have next number fluency and number identification fluency. Next number fluency and missing number fluency. Megan, if you advance the slide, you see that red circle The red circle is there because number identification fluency doesn't have any materials that students will see. Oh, I see what the mistake is. That should be next number fluency. I apologize. So next number fluency doesn't have any materials that students will see. What happens is the teacher will say 46, and a student is expected to provide the next number in the counting sequence, which would be 47. This is known as strategic counting. So this assesses students' knowledge of counting principles and their skill in counting. So it's an oral assessment. There's nothing for students to look at or to write. They simply respond to the teacher's prompt. In missing number fluency, we're again looking at strategic counting, but this is a more advanced version of strategic counting. Missing number fluency assesses this at a more advanced level because students are given a box with 3 identified numbers and 1 missing number. The goal is to identify the missing number in each box. So here, the example you see is the number 15, a blank space, 17, 18. We know that the missing number would be 16. That is the number that students would be expected to provide. The assessment can also become more advanced. So we also use patterns of 5 and 10 in addition to this pattern of 1. Why is strategic counting important? It is a fundamental skill that leads to mathematical proficiency and understanding. It's also critical in the development of problem solving, and it allows for flexibility in mental computing. So it's a skill that we really want students to own and develop over time. Those are the early number math skills. Students will also have computation, which is a worksheet. Math problems are presented in a stratified way. What does that mean? It means that students will have 2 worksheets and each worksheet is ordered in the same way. So if on worksheet A, students are presented with addition, subtraction of numbers that do not require regrouping, they're going to see the same sequence on worksheet B. So they are equal and level. And the way, after teachers score it, they'll get an average of the number of digits the students scored correct with, and that's how you determine the total score for computation. Concepts and applications, again, is a problem-solving measure. So students are going to see different things at 2nd grade. They might see a clock, an analog clock, and they may be asked to identify the time indicated on the analog clock and rewrite that time on a digital clock face. They may be given a set of numbers that they have to compare. Which number is greater, which number is less than, where are the numbers equal. They may be asked to solve word problems that are very similar to the math they had to solve or respond to on the computation measure. But of course, in this instance, they are given language, and that sometimes can become a barrier. So the way Acadians has structured the concepts and applications measure at the 2nd grade, the measure is at 1st grade readability. So more students are able to access the language involved. But there's no vocabulary that students will need to understand. So Acadians assessments have benchmark goals. The benchmark goals will allow educators to evaluate the data and identify the odds of students achieving later reading and mathematics outcomes. The benchmark goals vary by specific grade level, by the assessments being used, and the point in time. Students who fall above benchmark are not likely to need any support other than core instruction if instruction and the curriculum remains the same. The same for students who are at benchmark. They're likely to make progress with effective core instruction. Again, that's meaning that the instruction has to be at or about the same quality as the instruction the student is receiving. When it comes to students being below benchmark or well below benchmark, then we have to take a closer look. So if a student is below benchmark, they're likely to need some strategic support, especially if instruction or curriculum remains the same. And that means that the student may be provided with small group instruction, some small group intervention in the classroom or outside of classroom. Maybe the student will be invited to attend an after-school program or a Saturday program. The same for students who are well below benchmark. Students who fall well below benchmark are likely to need more intensive support. And so now we're talking about even smaller groups than a small group instruction, and the instruction, the additional instruction may need to occur more often. Megan is going to take us through the next academic screener.
Thanks, Winta. So the next screener that we're going to take a look at is called MAP Growth. And this assessment, this screener will cover both mathematics and reading. So in this video, we're going to watch a brief overview of the MAP Growth assessment. This video is also available in something called the MAP Growth Family Toolkit, which we will share at the end of our session tonight in the chat so that you can use it as a valuable resource. It has access to this video, but it also has many other documents and some other small videos that you can watch to kind of gain further understanding around this academic screener as well.
MAP Growth measures what your child knows and is ready to learn. This assessment was created by NWEA, a not-for-profit organization. NWEA was founded in 1977 by educators and researchers with a mission of partnering to help all kids learn. More than 9 million students in the US and in 140 countries worldwide use MAP Growth. Most schools give MAP Growth tests in the fall, winter, and spring. The test is adaptive, which means that it adjusts to each student's responses. If a student gets a question right, it gets harder. If a student gets a question wrong, it gets easier. The test is not concerned with which grade a student is in. It will go as high or low as it needs to. This helps you see if your child is testing above, below, or right at their grade level in all types of subjects, including math, reading, language usage, and science. Students receive an individual RIT score at the end of the test. MAP Growth measures student performance with our RIT scale, the most stable and mature scale in the industry. This scale measures and tracks performance across grade levels, so you will be able to see your child's growth from year to year and over multiple years. Another great thing about the RIT score is that you can connect it to online resources. For example, you can get book suggestions based on a student's reading level and use free sites like Khan Academy, which provide practice exercises based on your child's learning needs. NWEA also has a College Explorer tool that lets you enter your child's RIT score to see which colleges they can likely get into. Teachers also get a student report after the test. This report explains what the student knows and helps the teacher and the student set goals for learning. Every 3 years, NWEA provides schools with norms. This is anonymous data for more than 10 million students around the country. It tells teachers and students the top, middle, and bottom scores of all these students combined, so they can compare where a student is to other students and help them grow. A teacher can then say to a student, "Wow, you're in the 98th percentile. What kind of work will keep you challenged?" Or, "You're in the 58th percentile for math. Let's look at where you need help." MAP Growth improves both teaching and learning by giving teachers accurate information about your child. For more information about MAP Growth, visit nwea.org/parent-toolkit.
So that's also the site there at the end that was just referenced, the toolkit site that we'll link again. So as with our previous screeners that we've already talked about, the Acadians Reading and the Acadians Math screeners, MAP Growth assessments measure what students know and what they are ready to learn next. And these assessments, MAP Growth assessments, are aligned to the next gen learning standards, and they are done 3 times throughout the course of the school year: the fall, the winter, and the spring. And the MAP growth assessment is a computer adaptive assessment, and you heard them mention that in the video, meaning that it is done solely on a computer by a student with a teacher proctoring the assessment. So while students start with on grade level questions, the assessment then adapts to student responses, and the RIT score is grade level dependent. This assessment is a bit longer than our Acadian screener that we talked about earlier, but it's only as long as needed to be to capture the information necessary based on individual student responses. And MAP growth provides the educator and the student with a RIT score in order to identify student achievement in a specific subject area. And these RIT scores are grade independent, and it allows for students' progress to be tracked over time. And MAP growth is generally used in 3rd grade and above. So what are RIT scores? And you heard the video mention a RIT score. So students receive a RIT score upon the completion of each of those benchmark assessments. So in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring. And they're used to measure student achievement and student growth. So the RIT scale extends equally across all grades, making it possible to compare a student's score at various points throughout his, her, or their school year. All students in grades K to 12 are measured on the same RIT scale, and students are not expected to gain the same number of RIT points each year. The equal scale does not mean equal gains for each student in each grade. The number of RIT points that a student gains over time is not the same for every grade or the same for every year. Okay, we just want to see that growth over time. The stable scale across grade levels allows for our educators to accurately measure each student's academic growth throughout that current school year and over time, meaning then from year to year. So moving from grade to grade, that data will go with them and can be tracked. Schools also have the ability to access and print a family report, and you'll also have access to that family toolkit that helps explain MAP growth a little bit further and in a little more detail. So how do schools and teachers use these MAP growth scores? So as with our previously discussed screeners as well, educators use them to inform instruction for the whole group. So that's core, the whole class, core instruction, groups of students, and individual students. It also allows them to personalize learning for students and monitor growth of individual students over time. And schools are able to see performance and progress at not only the grade level, but at the school level as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Winta now. She's going to take you through some next steps and resources.
So what's next? Your child has been assessed by an educator at his, her, or their school. Teachers will take time to analyze and record the data and make decisions regarding your child's instructional next steps. In some cases, the instruction will not change. In other cases, your child's daily instruction will be adjusted. This may mean, as I stated before, that there will be some small group instruction provided. There may be intervention provided in a group of maybe 3 students, maybe less than 3 students. There may be another program that is used to provide this intervention. Another thing that could happen is your child may receive an invitation to participate in the recovery intervention that is happening, and that may be after school, before school, or on Saturdays. And the data that teachers receive or obtain from this assessment might be used to either inform your child's special education services or help develop your child's IEP if they don't already have an IEP. The one thing that, well, more than the one thing, but one thing that we hope comes out of this is that there are more discussions with teachers and families regarding this data regarding what can be done to support students and what can be done to accelerate students who may be at or above benchmark. That's not the end. There is no ceiling when it comes to what we expect our students to do. We want them to go as high as they can to reach their full potential. Some resources may be provided at your child's school. I would definitely ask the teachers, because teachers usually have, if it's not a school-wide system of resources supporting literacy and mathematics, classroom teachers may have their own resources that they can provide you with that will help your child. And if you have your resources that you're already using, I would share those resources with the teacher, because the teacher may be able to support that as well. So in addition to having a discussion with your child's school, you also want to look at some freely available resources, such as Khan Academy and any other family resources that are available from your child's school. And thank you.
Thanks, Winta, and thanks, Megan. I have a few questions. I have some questions that I've seen in the chat, and I wanna get to in the last few minutes that we have together. So one of the things that I'm seeing in the chat is that for our students with IEPs, we know that they already may need additional supports than their general education peers. Their teachers work closely with them. So how do these screeners help teachers support those students? Why are they, I guess, necessary? If that's a fair question to ask.
So I can give you my perspective as an educator and a parent of two children with learning disabilities. The screeners will help. And sometimes what teachers will do is they'll give the screener on grade level, right? So that we can determine that we already know exactly what we already know. This child has deficits. And then there is something called a survey that they can administer that will help determine the grade level of the student in reading or reading development or mathematics. And then that can be used to build the student up and close those gaps. So it's sort of like walking up the staircase of reading and math development. I know Acadians is really, really good with that, but Map Growth is as well. So we can use the information that we have from these assessments to determine exactly where students are, and that will help us determine what the next steps are. Because of course, we want to make sure that all of our students are closing gaps and all of our students are able to make access and make future learning goals, whatever they may be.
So are teachers using this type of information to help inform IEP goals?
Yes, many are.
Yes. And they
Great.
absolutely should be, because if we think about really the discrete skills that are being assessed on these assessments, we're really drilling down to the individual skills. So while sometimes goals can be quite broad, it allows teachers to really make more specific skills that address the individual needs, as Winta was saying, and really begin to close those gaps, right? So instead of just saying the student may need additional support within, let's say, comprehension, let's go now and look at what are some of those underlying reasons why, right? So it allows us to pinpoint and be a little bit more specific than maybe what some of our other assessments might give us.
So you opened up the presentation talking about students or teachers knowing their students well is key to this. And so I can't help but think that the assessments, while teachers know their students well, what the assessments actually provide is like a snapshot in that moment of, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. It's definitely a snapshot. It's a quick pulse, right? Like, where is the student at this point in time? Where are they at the beginning of the year? And then what am I going to do instructionally? Because that's really what these assessments are doing. They're allowing teachers, educators, school communities to take a pause, look at their instruction and identify what do I need to do to ensure that I'm addressing all of my students' needs? So it is, yes, definitely, Jose, it's a pulse, a quick check on our students 3 times a year.
It's also timely, right? Because hopefully the way a student performs in the fall is not going to be the same as they perform in the winter and in the spring. There should be a change. Hopefully the change is increasing the skills and students are able to meet bigger goals mathematically or in terms of reading development.
So is this just another tool in a teacher's toolkit for progress monitoring or data collecting to help and like improve or maybe improve is the wrong word, but to help inform the IEP?
Yes, absolutely. And progress monitoring is another piece of it, right? Because then once we identify where that need is for support or how we're going to really make more specific goals, what are we doing to monitor the effectiveness of of our instruction, what we're doing for our students? And some of these assessments can be used to do that as well. So that's another piece to keep in mind.
That's great. Well, Winta and Megan, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate the information you shared. It was a lot of very useful information. I think it helps. I think it helps families really understand a little more what screeners are and how they work. And I think we might hear the word screeners a lot this year. And so this actually does help families in the long run understand it. Kim, any closing thoughts before we say goodbye to folks?
No, I just want to thank everyone again for joining us tonight. And yes, that is correct that you will be hearing a lot about screening throughout the year. As our team mentioned tonight, it happens, the screening process happens at least 3 times a year. And we hope that your takeaway from tonight is that screening does provide valuable information. And I just want to go back to how Winta started, which is that it is low stakes information. It's a low stakes process that provides valuable information, again, that not only informs the goals of your child's IEP and the present levels of performance using an actual measurement that that is more than just observation based, right? It's a concrete measurement that can be used, and that it also informs the day-to-day instruction that your teacher delivers to your child. So if you have questions about the specific screeners that are being used at your school, then you should definitely go right to your child's teacher and to your child's principal, who should be able to tell you the specifics of what screeners are being used at their school if it wasn't Acadians or math.
Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining. Hope you have a wonderful evening. And we will see you all next week, where we'll be with our assistive technology team talking about assistive technology and getting an overview of the process. So thanks. Stay safe, everyone. And we'll see you all next week. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.